Sawadee-krap. Good afternoon to everyone. Let me start this way. First, I want to thank Hotelivate, Mr. Manaf Tanadi for inviting me here. And he was just speaking about hotel rooms. And let me start by recounting. I used to, once upon a time, work in a hotel called the Holiday Inn. So I was a banquet waiter, bellhop, and so on. And the hotel business industry has come a long way from then. These days in hotels, it's a good point. Sometimes it's very difficult to turn all the lights off. So in fact, I use a flashlight. Everything is dark, and I use a flashlight to find my way to get a glass of water and so on, because otherwise, if I turn the lights on, there'll be something on when I go back to bed. However, what I want to talk about today is just this, relationship and correlation, the old and the new, the absolute, the relative, what goes around and comes around, what goes around and keeps going. So, in this dark room, using a flashlight is from the distant past. But in fact, we have very modern facilities. All the lighting, I'm not very gadgetry, so I'm always a little bit, in fact, sometimes a little bit fearful that I'll do something that I cannot undo, right, in rooms. But the flashlight is from the past, but in fact, it works pretty well. So if you think about relationship and correlation this way, I just came back this morning from London, okay, and it's really nice to have a timer. I was at a kind of an academic policy workshop, and of course, you have these guys like me, they would talk overtime. So the key is to be the first speaker, otherwise if you're the last speaker, the time is squeezed, but now I have a timer here. I want to talk about what is linear and what is circular. Linearity and circularity. If you look at the world that we're in, we see signs, evidence, episodes, incidents of linear. Things are going in a straight line, kind of upward sloping. If you look at technology, you look at hotels. Now we have technologies, facilities that we will not reverse. It will not regress. So we have electricity. We have shower facilities. Now they all have rain shower, right? So we're not going to go back to the ancient days of using a bucket and a bowl to take a shower. So that's what I call kind of evolution linearity. But in other ways, we don't see linearity. We thought we did. If you look at the global landscape, in the last 7 decades, we thought that the world would be able to solve all kinds of problems. After the Second World War, so we've had, war and conflict pretty much characterize human history, right? But after the Second World War, the idea was that if you come up with the right institutions, the right rules, you can pretty much solve, address all kinds of challenges and conflicts. So we had the United Nations, what became the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, all these international institutions that for the last 7 decades have worked well. And for a time, when the European Union was in its formative stage, from the coal and steel community to the economic community, European community in the 1990s, that was really the crowning achievement of this global order after the Second World War, right? And in the 1990s, it looked like, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it looked like the end of history. It really looked like, democratization, free markets, capitalism would prevail, had prevailed. And there was a book written, of course, about the end of history by Frank Fukuyama. But this has not been the case. In the last 30 years, in fact, we're seeing circularity. What used to go on in the distant past has come back to challenge us, to haunt us. The liberal international order as we know it is unraveling. You look at the United Nations, the way that it works is dysfunctional. I mean, it's still there, and we need it to be there, but it's not effective. The structure of it, permanent members are 2 European countries, United Kingdom, France, and of course China, Russia, and the US. But Germany not in it, India not in it, Japan not in it. So there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the way that the UN is structured, the power imbalance, because we have had a power shift, and this power shift has led to different apportionment, right? The US is not as weighty, not as powerful as it used to be. See, the number is that, in 1960, the US used to account for 40% of global GDP, of the world economy. Now it's less than one-sixth, right? 16%. So if you think about this structure, it's really out of sync. And as a result, it has manifested in instability, disruptions, world trade. The Doha round is dead, so the multilateral trading system is finished. All you have now is regional, bilateral FTAs. You look at different regions, European Union, European integration, that whole European idea, which is really the crown jewel of the post-Second World War liberal international order. That also has been coming loose at the seams. Brexit, the rise of the populist right in Hungary, Poland, Austria, even France, Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, the latest. So the idea of further, closer, ever closer integration is no longer. It's not quite disintegrating, but there are centrifugal forces challenging, pulling apart the integration that we've known in Europe. But Europe is not alone. And you look at the United States of America, this is the bastion of democracy. There must be some Americans in the room. And I think I can probably talk about the Trump tweets at night, late at night, how the tweeting is really the Trump policy mechanism, and how the world dances to his tunes. He's very clever, actually very shrewd, because the late night tweets is very shrewd, because you go to bed, you just say a few things, you just do some clicking, and then you sleep. The whole world is dancing mad, and when you get up, they're answering to your tunes, what you said before you went to bed. That's, I think, deliberate. But Trump, someone like him, was bound to come along. They had 30 years before they won. In the 1980s, Patrick Buchanan was saying very similar messages that Donald Trump has been saying. America first, more isolationism, more kind of go it alone. So Trump no longer, U.S. under Trump, he's a first, I think, post-Cold War American president. He neither accepts the liberal international order, nor rejects it. He just takes it as it comes, case by case, transactional. So the U.S., as a result, is not leading the world that it used to lead, used to spearhead in the 50s, 60s, 70s. The Middle East, after 100 years of Sykes-Picot, 1916, 2016, 2012, the 2010s, Arab Spring, spelled the end of the Sykes-Picot. So now the Middle East looks like it used to be in the 19th century, with tribes, warfare, families, clans. That's how the place was run for centuries. So it was really a blip of a century from 1916 that it has some order, it has some boundaries, but no longer, these borders no longer hold. Asia, now let me come to Asia. So China is the buzzword. China is the game changer, the geopolitical game changer of the world, not just Asia, Southeast Asia, everywhere else. You have the Belt and Road Initiative, as you know, BRI, AIIB, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the New Development Bank. China has taken over the South China Sea, has built artificial islands, 7 artificial islands out of rocks and reefs in the South China Sea, very near Philippines and Vietnam. China has weaponized these islands and made them into a forward basis of China. At the same time, China has investments everywhere, Chinese tourists all over Southeast Asia. But if you think of it, I mean, this is really how China was 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. So the last couple of 100 years, it's really kind of a blip in a long continuum of world history. China was top dog 1,000 years ago. So I think that what they're doing, they see it as a manifest destiny. China feels entitled to be top dog again. And you can see Southeast Asia, we've had to accommodate China because under Obama, the pivot and rebalance, this whole Obama geostrategic strategy didn't quite deliver. So China challenged it. The US didn't have the answer. So China has won over Southeast Asia and has taken over the South China Sea. Also, China has taken over this mainland Southeast Asia. I see Southeast Asia as 2 domains. There's a mainland domain, it's mainland Southeast Asia along the CLMTV, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, along the Mekong River. And then there's a maritime Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia is a region. Southeast Asia is also organization. As we know, ASEAN. ASEAN has a large market that you will be able to bank on for the next 2 decades. This is a market of 645 million people, 2.6 trillion GDP, and only growing, the fastest growing region in the world, about 5.3% GDP on average. But it's really under the shadow of China. Now, if you look at the world, so I've talked about the US, Europe, Middle East, Asia, full of tensions now. Tensions in Asia. China-Japan tensions from the past. China-Philippines, China-Vietnam. ASEAN has been divided by China. And China can exercise a veto at will through Cambodia, through Laos. This is why ASEAN has not been able to come up with a unified position on the South China Sea. So in this frame, the world is not linear. We are going back to the past. We're going back to the past. There are ways that, I've been thinking a lot and writing about the global order and our regional framework, what's going to happen in this region in the next 10 years, 20 years. I would say that, it's not pleasant. A lot of the tensions are going to lead to some turmoil. I was in London talking about Thai politics, and here again too, if you look at the, if you will, kind of a sine curve. What goes up comes down, what goes around comes around. Southeast Asia in the 1990s looked like it was democratizing. Thailand was leading the way. Around 2000, 2001, early 2000s, Indonesia fell right behind. Eventually, Myanmar had elections in 2015. It looked like Southeast Asia was becoming more democratic. But over the last 10 years, it has gone the other way. There has been an authoritarian resurgence all over Southeast Asia. Thailand, of course, very blatant, very conspicuous with a military dictatorship that reached its 4th year anniversary just yesterday. So you see in the paper some protests, some controversy. But the authoritarian tendencies can also be seen in the Philippines. President Duterte, his war on drugs, very, very brutal, very violent, extrajudicial. It's already killed several thousand people without trial. Cambodia, Hun Sen has pretty much dismantled the opposition party. He's going to have an election on July 29th. He will win. It will not be legitimate. You see Malaysia. Malaysia, when I was in London, a lot of our discussions were heartened by the Malaysian results because Malaysia put I don't call it reversal, but it's more like a pause on this accelerating authoritarianism. President Najib Razak has been very abusive, very authoritarian, controlled the judiciary, very corrupt, 1 MDB, huge embezzlement, and he got away with everything. And looked like he was going to win the election, but he lost big time, and now he's paying for it. So a lot of people think, okay, Malaysia is mending its way, maybe it's going to reverse the trend. Maybe it will give some boost, some momentum, inject some life into democratization again in Southeast Asia. That we don't know. The jury is out. But the trend has been the other way. So when it comes to political regimes and government, between democracy, democratization, authoritarianism, dictatorship, what goes around comes around. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I think democratization can make headway again around here in this region. But it can go the other way. I mean, it seems like there's no absolute when it comes to this democracy and dictatorship. Thailand is smack in the middle of it. Also no absolutes when it comes to the global order. We used to think that we found a way to manage global governance. Peace, stability, but no longer. Tensions, unraveling, integration unraveling, the rise of the populist right, centrifugal forces running amok. So these are not linear. But the good news is there's some linearity. Technology is linear. So now we have the smartphone. We're not going to go back and use the analog phone, We have, I've just been on a plane for 12 hours. We're not going to go back to intercontinental travel by cruise liners anymore. And air travel I don't think it's going to get that much faster, but they're talking about having rockets and so on. Maybe it'll be faster. Certainly all the 4.0, fourth industrial revolution, robotics, artificial intelligence, all of these technological, they call disruptions, but they're not really disruptions. It's just change. It's just a change that very rapid and a change that we don't like because it forces us to change. We like the status quo. We like the status quo to have gradual change. When the change is so rapid, sudden, accelerating, it forces us, it's coercive kind of change. That's what we don't like. That's why we call it disruptions. But the fourth industrial revolution is going to be linear. And the sky is the limit. I don't know how it's going to be, but this is an analogy I like. The analogy I use for my students is that, it's kind of like 120 years ago, thereabout, people started flying by, putting wings on their arms. And they ran down a hill, trying to flap the wings and trying to fly. And eventually, the Wright brothers came along, and aviation kind of took off over the next several decades. So now I think we're at the cusp of running down a hill, trying to flap the wing to fly. And it's just the beginning at the outset. In the next 30 years, 50 years, we will have massive, profound transformation from technology. So that is linear. That is linear. And that is good news, I think, for the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry is, from restaurants to hotels and all things associated along the way, in a way, it's linear and it's non-linear. I mean, we've needed hotels since time, since the beginning of time, right? We always have hotels. So I think that hotels will always do well. I think hotels will have to, restaurants, hospitality, tourism, foot massage, and so on. The trend, the demographics of Southeast Asia is that fastest growing, a lot more people. I mean, people are not going to decrease. There'll be a lot more people, bigger market, higher income. And I also noticed that there's a lot more intra-regional travel than ever. I think if you look at the numbers from like Air Asia, right? I think they should get the award for integrating ASEAN. I mean, ASEAN is connected. We talk about connectivity as a way of integration, but now you have ASEAN peoples traversing the region like never before. So there will be a lot of demand for hospitality. So that's good news. But you should bear in mind what's going to come is some tension, some conflict. I hope not world conflict, not to the point of war, but we're seeing the past becoming the future in some ways. It's not linear when it comes to geopolitics. Even in Southeast Asia, what China is doing is manifest destiny is only returning to its past glory. And we can see that the global order from World War II now is unraveling. It needs to be reinvented, reshaped, rejuvenated, and that requires major power adjustments. Power shifts and transitions require adjustments. So the bigger guys who used to be the top dogs, like the US, for example, would have to make some way. You have to accommodate India, Japan, Germany, all kinds of countries that now are pushing for a greater space. If they don't get the space, we will have tension and most likely some turmoil. That is the bad news. But the good news is that there's some linearity in what we do. So for the hospitality, I think that you will see more people in this region. Southeast Asia is a good bet to bank on. People will have more income. The politics is decoupled with the economic growth to a large degree. I mean, Thai economy, the numbers today is, it's growing almost 5%, despite a military dictatorship, right? So there's some decoupling there. So you have to be discerning. But overall, I think that this is a market, a region that you can bank on for hospitality, and not just Southeast Asia, but if you look at Southeast Asia connecting to Northeast Asia and South Asia, from Bangkok, I like to be based here because within 5 hours, I can reach half of the global population by flight. India, China, all of Southeast Asia. So it's a good place to be. And for me personally, I think geography is destiny. So Thailand, the politics will be very nasty, ugly, messy, unstable. Economic development will chug along. Growth will expand into 3 to 4% because we have a good location. You look at CLMTV, mainland Southeast Asia, overall ASEAN. Thailand is a corridor, Thailand, Myanmar, connecting to South Asia. Thailand is a hub of mainland Southeast Asia and also ASEAN. So, I think for me, being in Thailand, I think things will get worse here in Thai politics before they can get better. But when it comes to growth and income, I think we'll chug along nicely. Not to be complacent, but to know that things will be bad, but that Thailand will be okay. For the region and for you in your businesses, you have to bear in mind that the global landscape is going to be rocky. It's going to be rougher. But this presents challenges. In terms of regional economic dynamism, that's pretty much in train, on track. So somewhere in between, you have to find your niches and ways to make your businesses work. Thank you.